evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar, which will focus on offshore wind projects already initiated in the North Shore region. Before our speakers begin, the operating committee of the Cape Ann Climate Coalition wanted to assure our listeners that we recognize that potential impacts of the fishing industry from offshore wind farm development are a big concern for Cape Ann's coastal communities, especially Gloucester. In our complicated world, everything affects everything else, and no one webinar can touch on all the significant issues. The CACC intends to devote a future webinar in the coming months to exploring these possible impacts and the complex trade-offs with the damage that climate change is already causing for the fishing community. I want to thank Tom Mikas for being our Zoom host this evening, and to thank Maureen Aylward for being our moderator. Take it away, Maureen.
Thank you so much, Candace, for that introduction. I'm Maureen Aylward, as Candace just said, and I'm going to be your facilitator for the evening. Welcome to Exploring Offshore Wind Opportunities for Cape Ann. Tonight's program is presented by the Cape Ann Climate Coalition's Community Building and Education Group, and Susan Hogue produced the event this evening with help from Lisa Smith and technical assistance from Tom Mikas. Let's see. So this evening's program is set up with 4 panelists, and we'll hear from them. I'm going to introduce them shortly, and they will present different perspectives on offshore wind. Each speaker will present for about 15 minutes, and some of them will have slides, some of them will not. And at the completion of the program, I'll facilitate a Q&A session. To ask a question of the panel or to a specific panelist, please put your question into the chat. We are not having a live Q&A with the audience this evening, so I will be taking all of the questions, and I will be trying to get to as many of them as I possibly can in the time allotted, which we should have about 20 minutes at the end of the presentation. Now to the program. I'm happy to introduce our first panelist. I'm going to provide the introductions in order. The first panelist is Cindy Keegan. She is co-chair at Salem Alliance for the Environment, which is based in Salem, and the Environmental Health and Safety Manager and COVID-19 Coordinator at Analogic Corporation. Cindy will present exciting things are happening with offshore wind in Salem. Jay Borkland is the Director for Ports and Supply Chain for Avantgarde Renewables. Avangrid Renewables is a pioneer in offshore wind development and has completed 3 European projects and is currently building Vineyard Wind 1 off the coast of Martha's Vineyard in partnership with the Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. Avangrid Renewables will be using the Salem port to marshal, assemble, test, and transport turbines to the wind farm sites, and Jay will present economic opportunities in offshore wind development. Jay is also joined this evening by his colleague, Patrick Johnson, who is the Manager of External Affairs for Avangrid Renewables, and he's working on Park City Wind and Commonwealth Wind projects. Larry Chretien is the Executive Director of the nonprofit Energy Consumers Alliance of New England. Its mission is to harness our power as energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. Larry will present benefits of offshore wind to Gloucester's municipal aggregation. And finally, we will hear from Bob Blair. He's a senior pilot with Eastern Point Pilots. Bob will talk about maritime jobs that support offshore wind. So let's start our panel with Cindy Keegan. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for Cape Ann Climate Coalition for hosting this. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. We'll see if it works. Okay. So again, I'm co-chair of Salem Alliance for the Environment. We typically are known as S.A.F.E, and you can certainly follow us or check out what's going on at salemsafe.org. I basically wanted to really cover a couple of key questions and just kind of kick off this meeting tonight, because we have some fantastic speakers after me. You guys have put a great panel together. All of them kind of heroes and idols of S.A.F.E right now. So I really am happy to be here with them. But I wanted to just basically cover, why S.A.F.E has been committed to wind and for how long. how we've worked to help preserve Salem Harbor's opportunity in the offshore wind environment, and certainly with help from other folks that are here. And then what we hope for a future as we move forward, and how we can all benefit, and what we should pay attention to, or ways to get involved as we move forward. So with that, just as a reminder, this is what Salem has hosted up until just a few years ago when the natural gas plant moved in. And this was built back in the 1948 was when they started. And I'll have a little timeline, but as you can see, we've been host to a large industrial site. We've been host to energy for a long time. And we know firsthand, not just the problems with climate change that certainly we've all learned more and more about, but problems with just fossil fuel generation in general, right? We've lived next door to it. So, kind of quick little timeline here. I'm not going to go through every piece of this, but, that plant has been active for a long time. Back in 2000, it was named one of the Filthy Five. And so S.A.F.E really got involved around that time frame, really fighting for scrubbers and lining of the on-site fly ash and wastewater pits that were there that weren't even lined, and so they could seep right into the ocean. And as we worked hard at that, we realized that it wasn't likely that with all the new regulations that were finally coming into play, it was becoming less and less economical for a fossil fuel plant to run there, an old one that would need significant upgrades. And so between those timeframes, we actually there was an article published, an op-ed that we helped put together about kind of the writing on the wall that the power plant might actually go away, which was just, heresy in town, right? How could that possibly ever happen? And then sure enough, the power plant announced that they plan to shut down in 2014. They said in 2010, we're planning to go away by 2014. And that meant the town was faced with the prospect possibly of a defunct old shuttered power plant sitting there, just fenced in, 65 acres of waterfront property. And that sent panic to everyone, environmentalists, as well as city councilors, as well as just people that lived in the area, right? No one wanted to see just a gate around a hulking, rotting power plant on a beautiful piece of property. The challenge was for S.A.F.E, we participated in a lot of the renewable, the changes that could happen at that site. And there were a lot of ideas. There was, beautiful condos, there was beautiful waterfront property, and, yacht clubs, and all kinds of wonderful ideas. But the reality was we all still needed power. We all still needed energy in our area. And S.A.F.E took a very controversial position that we had an educated community that could shepherd a project through as best as possible and watchdog that plant in its operation. But we could also fight for certain things. So when footprint, oops, sorry. Hold on, go back. When Footprint came in and bought the facility, what we really argued for under kind of a community benefits agreement was a few conditions if that gas plant was going to come in. And we said, we want a definitive closure date, which is 2050. It's written into their permit. We want there to be consideration for a potential wind terminal, because we were advocating for wind many, many years ago. We were holding seminars. We were advocating for Cape Wind. We were going and visiting at other wind turbines, and we were trying to install them in Salem, but you guys beat us to the punch up in Gloucester. And we wanted to allow for the option of landing offshore wind power if in fact it ever came to be. And we wanted to make sure it was a quick start facility so that it could allow for what they call firming of renewables. So when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you've got something that can provide base load and continue making sure that you have power at the times available. So, so that was really kind of our first vote. So we said, if we have to swallow the bitter pill of the natural gas plant coming in here, then at least let's make sure that we have these conditions. And we are going to continue to fight for two things. And these these have been, well, really three things. We're going to continue to fight for wind power because we believe that that is the, best way to a renewable energy on our shores, in our area. It's the thing that can provide us the most power and get us off fossil fuels. Two, we're going to push for electrification of everything possible. And three, we're going to wean ourselves off of natural gas, right? Whether that's natural gas leaks, and other opportunities to electrify. So those have been kind of our three primary objectives from S.A.F.e's perspective for many years now. So in 2020, we got to hear this wonderful report that Jay Borkland presented as part of Mass CEC's draft report on ports, saying that Salem Harbor, in fact, did have the possibility of being a real player in the offshore wind industry, which we always thought, but we didn't really know, right? We knew we had a deep water port. We knew we had 65 acres, now down to 40 something acres now that the gas plant was there. But we really didn't know whether it was a real possibility. We didn't know if it was a pipe dream. And finally, we had this glimmer of hope that maybe it might happen. Maybe it was something better than we even thought. And then in March of 2021, Footprint said, hey, we got this great plan for the remainder of the property. We're going to put condos up. And we all panicked and said, you've got to be kidding me. Like, they continued to say, people come knocking on the door every once in a while. These were the quotes. They kick the tires, thinking about maybe doing some offshore wind stuff, and then we never hear from them again. They go cold. Nobody's interested. We'll never be able to develop this for offshore wind, so we're going to put condos here. It's the best thing we could possibly do. And we all rallied with many different people's support, including Bob Blair, who's going to talk later, and said, no, this is crazy. The last 10 years is not indicative of what the next 10 to 20 years is going to bring. And we know that this is a prime property for this. And we have to ensure that if condos get built, there's no return. No one's going to tear the condos down to now put in offshore wind port. It's never going to happen, right? So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And thankfully, there was a fairly good groundswell of public support and private support for pushing Footprint Power to put an RFP out to truly ascertain whether there was interest in wind. And there was. Commonwealth Wind and Crowley jointly submitted some interest for that, and then submitted interest through the state bidding process and was awarded. So we're really looking at this as an opportunity for the region as a whole, and beyond the region, for both jobs, obviously for climate, and for the economy. And so we really, we've been really busy just trying to make sure we kept the site available and that the site was moving forward. But now we want to move to this opportunity of talking more with regional partners, right? And saying, well, what are the concerns? What can people do? How can we all positively benefit? And how can we also make sure that, we're looking at what the possible negative impacts are too, and planning for those as best as possible and trying to avoid what we can. So we're really interested in starting a dialogue. And so this is great to have us here tonight. From Salem's perspective, the current plan is, just to make sure everybody's clear, it's not that we're going to be putting offshore wind in Salem Harbor. It's not that we're going to be putting offshore wind turbines just off of Salem Harbor. Right now, this plan is that the Salem Harbor the remaining acres of the Salem Harbor port area will support marshaling, which basically means keeping the supplies there, being able to lift and set up the supplies and then sail them out to sea. And those would be supporting the South Shore developments right now. There is talk of additional Gulf of Maine locations. We're going to need way more wind than even just what's being proposed right now, if we're going to meet the state targets and the climate actions that are required. And so So we do expect that we would be in a good position to also support any Gulf of Maine locations that are determined. Those are likely to have to be floating turbines, which are a really new or fairly new technology. They're still working on it. There's pilot projects out there. And then ongoing O&M of wind turbines, perhaps. And then still whether it makes sense to be a potential interconnect for power. Obviously, there's high power lines already at that site. It seems like a natural to connect at any of the power locations along the eastern seaboard rather than someplace completely new. Important next steps, we're going to be really looking at community benefit agreements and what we can come up with the new players on, in town. So we're going to need to kind of understand what we want to work for that and what the region might need to do as well. We have to really look at the impacts of construction and operation. We're trying to really understand what the jobs mean, both the hiring practices, diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera, as well as educational outreach. I refer you to these links and I'll put them in the chat later as well. But Mass CEC has some great information if you're looking to find out more about what the jobs are and what's available. We're going to be really watching the Gulf of Maine plans. There's a tri-state meeting that's actually coming up on May 19th, 2022 here. It's an open meeting. It's an all day long meeting. It's 9 to 5, but it is open to anybody who wants to register. And that's the link for that I'll also put in the chat. And then we're really watching the both legislation and transmission plans and wildlife, et cetera. And what we've partnered with primarily is New England for Offshore Wind. It's a consortium of many different environmental groups and labor groups, really looking at wanting to support offshore wind, but again, trying to make sure that it's done in the best manner possible. So again, this is where we were, and this is where we're hoping to go. That's the quick little slide that we've been seeing as to what it might look like in the future. So with that, I'll just put a quick plug in for S.A.F.E. Our next meeting is June 2nd for the public. We haven't decided what the topic's going to be yet, but typically it's always the first Thursday of every month. And those are our 3 primary items, and that's how to contact us. Thank you very much. And now I'll pass it off to Jay, I think, right?
Thanks, Cindy. Jay, you and Pat Johnson from Avangrid Renewables will now make your presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And Cindy, thank you very much for that lead up. We are very much indebted to S.A.F.E. for being a welcome partner and participant of what we're trying to do. As it turns out, Salem Harbor and the Footprint Power Plant is a great gem for the East Coast for offshore wind. Was sort of overlooked for a long time until I think folks at S.A.F.E. Jumped up and down and waved their hands around and said, hey, pay attention to us. And we did, and we just fell in love with it from the standpoint of using it. It's very unique, and we'll get into that in a minute. Pat Johnson, who I can't tell if he is, can you see him as well? Is he unmuted?
Yep, I'm here, Jay.
Okay, great. I'm hoping you'll run the slides because I'm not qualified.
Sure.
And we do have a presentation. Patrick is our manager of external affairs, and he is a person that you will all want to get to know. We are absolutely, we're the new kids on the block, I guess, to say, being a new business that's coming into a new industry, in fact, coming into the North Shore region. We're very dedicated to educating everyone on what it is that we are looking to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And we're really committed to public engagement and to localization of the jobs and the businesses and the economic benefits that come from being a marshaling port in the Northeast. So our remarks are going to focus around the projects, the offshore wind projects that Avangrid Renewables is building on the East Coast of Massachusetts, and also on the upgrades and the use of the Port of Salem in the offshore wind marshaling aspect. So I'm going to let Pat start and take the first couple slides, and he'll give you an overview of who Avangrid is, first of all, and second of all, what we're doing in the wind farm area, and then I'll grab on to what is going to happen up at the power plant in Salem. So Pat, take it away. Oh, he needs to be unmuted, I guess.
Sorry about that. I kept somehow muting myself, so I think we're good now. But thank you so much, Jay, for that intro, and thank you, Maureen, for hosting today, and everybody for turning out. So, as Jay said, my name is Pat Johnson. I lead external affairs for Offshore Wind team, especially working on the Park City Wind and Commonwealth Wind project. Very fortunate to work with Jay Borkland. I know many of you on the North Shore have known Jay and his expertise for many years. So the North Shore is lucky to have him. So I'm going to go through a couple slides, and then I'll turn it over to Jay. I'm going to kind of focus mainly on Avangrid Renewables and who we are as a company, and a bit about our projects generally. And then I'll kick it over to Jay to speak more directly about the Salem Port project and how important it is. So first, on Avangrid Renewables, we're a pretty large renewable energy company. As you'll see on the screen, we have a presence across the country, a long history in onshore wind and onshore solar projects at utility scale across the nation. Avangrid Renewables is headquartered in Portland, Oregon, but the offshore wind division of Avangrid Renewables is headquartered in Boston. We are part of a larger company called Avangrid that owns as well energy companies and transmission of energy across the country. And we are further part of a larger corporate team, a part of the Iberdrola Group, which is based in Madrid, Spain. And the Iberdrola Group owns a variety of especially clean and renewable energy businesses across the globe, and has a long history in offshore wind. And every day, Jay and I have the great opportunity to work with folks who are part of the broader Iberdrola team, some of whom have come over to help our team from Spain and other European countries who have history in offshore wind. And we're really lucky to work with those folks. And we're also growing and hiring and building a pipeline of US-based employees, and particularly employees in Massachusetts, who hopefully are going to be helping propel this industry for years to come. A little bit about sort of, first of all, you'll see in the image, a lot of folks are often wondering where exactly are the wind turbines going to be located. So as you can see on this slide, you'll see our lease areas, and I'll kind of go through each of those, that are south of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. The first, and hopefully I think my mouse will hopefully toggle here. You'll see in the sort of light blue, the Vineyard Wind 1 lease area. So a lot of folks probably are aware of Vineyard Wind 1. It was the first project to receive federal approval and financial close for a utility scale offshore wind project in the country. It is under construction. The turbines are going to be installed next year, later this year, next year. And the hope is for power to start being generated to the grid from Vineyard Wind in early 2024. This whole past year, as well, the onshore construction and preparations for where the power is going to interconnect into electric grid has been underway since last September in Barnstable, Massachusetts, especially in the village of Centerville, in the town of Barnstable on Cape Cod. And that's where that power is going to plug into the electric grid. Jay and I and Avangrid are really focused, and the main projects we're working on are on the Park City Wind project in the dark green, and the light green is Commonwealth Wind. Our company, Avangrid, is a co-owner of Vineyard Wind, the first project, but we own 100% of Park City Wind and Commonwealth Wind. And just in terms of background, some folks might have remembered when back in December, when the Salem Port project was announced as part of Commonwealth Wind, that it was originally called a Vineyard Wind project. But there was a bit of a corporate restructuring that happened late last fall and early winter, right around that same time, where Avangrid took 100% ownership of Commonwealth Wind, and our partners from Vineyard Wind, the Copenhagen infrastructure partners, took full control of a lease area more to the southeast called the 522 lease area, which they'll likely develop in the future. So to sum up, we own 50% of Vineyard Wind 1 and 100% of the 2 parcels in green, Park City Wind and Commonwealth Wind. And as you'll see on the slide, the importance of the Salem port for the deployment of both Commonwealth Wind and Park City Wind truly cannot be overstated. So a little bit more about Vineyard Wind, just a couple of statistics. So this is an 800 megawatt project. You see on the screen the cable corridor in orange or yellow, leading through Nantucket Sound, past Martha's Vineyard into Nantucket Sound, landing at Covell's Beach in Barnstable and plugging into the electric grid in West Barnstable. And you'll see some further details on the status of that project as well. A little bit more about Park City Wind. So similar in terms of power capacity to Vineyard Wind, this is an 804 megawatt project. Some statistics you'll see here on the screen in terms of the climate benefit and the benefit to electric ratepayers, that this will power 400,000 homes and be the equivalent of taking 1.1 million tons annually of pollution, equivalent of 200,000 vehicles from the roadways. And this is just like all these projects, is going to stabilize our electric grid in Massachusetts that badly needs new utility scale power sources, given the power we've seen come offline in recent years in Massachusetts. And this project is a bit confusing. It is, the power is purchased by ratepayers or the state of Connecticut and utility companies in the state of Connecticut for Park City Wind. The name Park City Wind comes from the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, that we're also working with on this project that's known as the Park City. But the power itself is going to plug into our regional integrated New England electric grid in Barnstable on Cape Cod. Just a bit of the timeline for this. We're sort of a year or so, year and a half behind Vineyard Wind. But the permitting is expected to be completed next year. We're expected to start onshore construction in Barnstable in the fall of 2023. Offshore installation would start at some point likely in 2024, and we hope to start delivering power to the electric grid in 2025 for Park City Wind. Obviously, we're mainly here tonight focused on Commonwealth Wind. So this is the largest project that Massachusetts has authorized thus far, and the largest offshore wind project yet authorized anywhere in New England. Dare I say, I believe the country that has been put out through a state procurement process yet. So 1,232 megawatts of clean energy, enough for 750,000 homes. And is the equivalent of taking 323 carbon emitting cars off the roadways. And it's going to create thousands of jobs and economic investment, which Jay will get into more detail. We have, and I'll sort of touch on this in a second, some significant economic benefits for this project and job creation projects in addition to the Salem Port project as well. So just in terms of timeline, this project was selected in December of 2021. We're just starting the permitting process for this project. The hope is to start sort of in that power delivery would be sometime likely in 2027. So just a little bit about sort of a slide summarizing the overall benefits and economic development opportunities from this project. You'll see at the top, we have a sort of similar project to our Salem Harbor project, a partnership with the Prysmian company that's going to build a cable manufacturing facility in the town of Somerset, Massachusetts, at a place called Brayton Point, that just like the Salem Harbor power plant was one of the filthy five, as Cindy mentioned, the Brayton Point coal plant in Somerset was also another one of the filthy five. So that is another legacy coal carbon emitting a location in Massachusetts, physical location that is now going to be a manufacturing facility making submarine cables for offshore wind projects. And we have some other components of our project, a service and maintenance hub and a control center for our wind turbines that will be located in the city of New Bedford. We have our power agreement with ENE, which I know Bruce is here to talk a little bit about, opportunities for municipal light plants and local energy organizations. So we're very excited about that ENE partnership. And that's actually the 32 megawatts of our 1,232. The 32 set aside is for that ENE partnership. And we have significant commitments to build a diverse and inclusive workforce. So just I'll at this point in the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Jay. But as I turn over to Jay, you see on your screen the sort of transformation similar to Cindy's slide of the former coal plant to the rendering of the offshore wind marshalling port in Salem, and at the bottom the transformation of the Brayton Point facility from a coal plant to a manufacturing facility. So Jay, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and nice setup for where we're headed here. And we're very gratified to be able to take not one, but two of the 55 power plants and repurpose them for offshore wind. In the one case in Brayton Point manufacturing, as you can see on the bottom, a large cable factory that will employ 300 to 400 people. It's a $400 million investment from the cable company, and they will be making subsea cables that go under the water that both connect offshore wind farms, but do all kinds of other things. So that will be an international cable making factory, and they'll be sending those cables from a giant cable lay ship all over the world to places, and it'll be made in Massachusetts, stamped right on it. So it's a great win for all of us here in the Commonwealth. And then secondly, in Salem, a really exciting opportunity to create a second marshalling port. So marshalling ports are important because we can't get the components out to the wind farm where they're erected directly from where they're manufactured. We need to have an interim port where we can stage the materials. The blades come in from one location, one manufacturer. The nacelle, which is the box that creates the power, comes in from another, and the tower sections come in from another location. And we use these marshalling ports to collect all of that information, all of that equipment, and then we put it on feeder barges that take it out to the offshore wind area and set it up. And so there are two ports that have been identified in Massachusetts. The first one is already built. It's in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and it's called the Marine Commerce Terminal. It's been in the news quite a bit for the last 6-8 years, and it will be utilized for the Vineyard Wind 1 project. And then after that, the Mayflower Wind has a project that it will be marshalling out of New Bedford. The exciting thing here is we'll be creating the second marshalling port in Massachusetts in order to be able to simultaneously build two wind farms, Park City Wind and Commonwealth Wind, at the same time that Mayflower is building its offshore wind farm. So the need for Salem is very important. It's critical in order for Massachusetts to achieve its goals. Massachusetts has decided to be a nation-leading climate and clean energy state, and they have aggressive targets for what our reduction in carbon emissions are, and it can only be met by creating new energy from things like offshore wind and other clean energy sources. So now Salem, why Salem? Well, it's the first unrestricted offshore wind port in Massachusetts. So the other ports that are part of the offshore wind constellation, shall we say, of ports, have different kinds of limitations. So there's either bridges so that some of the really tall vessels can't get into those ports, or there are narrow openings such as the hurricane barrier opening in New Bedford that limit some of the vessel traffic. And so Salem is important because it has no such limitations, and therefore can be utilized for a broad range of installation types. So we at Avangrid want to make sure that we are taking advantage of the latest technology in terms of how we receive and erect the offshore wind farms. And so in order to do that, you have to have a port that can use all of the different types of installation strategies. And I'll get to that in a minute. We are committed to Salem. Both Commonwealth and Park City Wind will be marshaled out of Salem. If everything goes according to plan, that's 2 gigawatts of power that will be built from the port in Salem. Next slide, please. So there's an offshore wind hub is what we're calling it. It will be a port facility that will receive components and then will take these components into offshore for installation. These are indeed ports that have deep water. So it allows large ships. They're very large ships that are going to be docking in Salem, both to drop off components for the storage for what we call the marshaling aspect, and then also the ships that will take the components out to the wind farm to be uprighted and put up. There's a huge community asset will be developed. We've seen this in New Bedford, that it has become a magnet for all kinds of maritime businesses and offshore renewable energy companies. We expect that the educational cluster that exists on the North Shore will get involved in many different components, and there are already aspects of Salem State and North Shore Community College that are working with our partner Crowley Marine that is going to be doing the actual construction to set up the port. And that's another very important element that I want to mention here, is that Crowley Marine is a critical partner of ours in this. They will actually undertake the construction to rebuild the port to make it suitable for us to use for the offshore wind industry. And then they will be the operator of that port for the long term. So they have the ability to run ports, and they have a lot of vessels that they can utilize to help assist us with the offshore wind installation. Next slide, please. So with the staging port, there'll be about $180 million investment that goes in to rebuild it. As you saw in the slide that Cindy showed, you probably see this slide a lot. It is an artist rendering, nearly correct, not quite 100%, and maybe in a future webinar when all of you are as good experts as we are at this, we'll ask you what's wrong with this picture. But for the time being, it does show that there are these giant components that are placed on the ground surface, and then they are transported to the offloading vessel, which in this case, we're showing a wind turbine installation vessel, which is a really big vessel. It will be, it'll be hard to miss when it's in the harbor here. This will generate about 310 local jobs during the construction. That's okay, 382, sorry, local jobs. You can go to the next one, Patrick. And then once the port is up and running, the wind turbine staging will look something like this, where here you see the 3 little white boxes in the foreground are the nacelle, we call them, or that's the power generating box. The tall white tubes are the tower sections that these go on top of the foundations, which if you can see behind Patrick and myself in our backdrop, the yellow bit is the part that goes into the water and the sediment, and then the white tube is that same tube that you're seeing on the vessel. And then of course the blades are those long, narrow, thin things. These are longer than a football field now. 382 feet is what's projected for the blades that'll likely be used for the Commonwealth Wind project. There'll be about 410 additional full-time job years created during that installation process for just our projects, which is another $182 million investment in the area. Next slide. This one, I'm just going to focus a little bit on the different types. One of the reasons that Salem is really important is because it's one of only a very few facilities that can handle all three of the types of installation that we may want to marshal projects for on the East Coast. There's kind of the way things are done now is with these feeder barge approach, where components are put on somewhat smaller vessels that come into port, and then they are sent out to the installation area where the giant installation vessel sits at that location and doesn't come into port. In the future, we expect that there will be vessels that will be built in the United States that'll be called Jones Act compliant, that will meet all the marine legal requirements for vessels in the US, and that those vessels could then come into port. And those are the vessels that we really are excited to see Salem be able to accept, because those vessels are not capable of going into a lot of the other ports on the East Coast. Even many of the ports that are being developed for offshore wind that you may read about in the newspaper, a lot of those will not be able to handle this kind of vessel. Salem will, makes it very special. And then to make it even more special, the future, as was mentioned in the Gulf of Maine, is floating offshore wind with these floating foundations that will allow the turbines to be erected on top of the floating foundations. And while that is not commercial yet, it's expected to be, and Salem, once again, is one of the few places on the East Coast that this type of foundation could be utilized and could be developed. Next slide. So what happens in an offshore wind marshaling port is it becomes an anchor for lots of other businesses that grow up around it. And we think that the prospect of redevelopment of a port facility in Salem will bring the opportunity to grow the region's maritime industry dramatically. Next slide. I talked a little bit about it's a part of a constellation. There are a number of other offshore wind ports that are either developed or being developed in the East Coast. The New Bedford terminal, which I spoke of, is in the upper left corner, is now being readied for the the Vineyard Wind project, slip of the tongue there. It will be it'll be utilized starting in about a year to begin the marshaling of that project. And then there on Martha's Vineyard itself, we are going to have an O&M port with a couple of crew transfer vessels there in Vineyard Haven. You see a rendering it in the upper right corner. And then the other pictures on this slide just show other offshore wind port development. Again, they're all renderings because these ports don't yet exist, but these are some that are coming online as well. Next slide. So what does this mean for Cape Ann, to kind of cut to the real chase here? So marshaling port in Salem, it will act as a catalyst for the marine and maritime activities throughout the region, just as it has in New Bedford, and just as these ports have in Europe, in the ports of Bremerhaven and Cuxhaven and Grana and Esbjerg in Europe, in Germany and Denmark, and in Hull and Grimsby in the United Kingdom. These kind of ports have propelled those areas into a whole new era of economic prosperity. So what are the kind of jobs? So there's engineering opportunities for both the construction, permitting, and the permitting of the port facility, and then also the design and construction oversight of the actual wind farm. There are maritime opportunities for dock workers, clerks of the work, managers, cost schedule analyses, health and safety experts, site workers, aides, stevedores, etc. From the marine activity, there will be jobs for divers, skilled underwater workers, vessel maintenance and vessel operation outfits, marine construction outfits, crew, captains, associated vessel crew for CTV, which is crew transfer vessels, guide vessels, all sorts of the different vessels that are used in an offshore wind farm. And then there's all kinds of skilled worker opportunities, from welding to rebar to pouring of concrete for the facility, etc. So as part of the construction, especially when local contractors are involved. There'll be as well as with the crews that will build and operate, maintain the wind farms, there'll be opportunities for folks on the North Shore. I've put the contact here on this slide for John Barry. He's the terminal operation manager. He's with Crowley, our partner, and he is the one who will be helping direct anyone who's interested in either getting contracts with the build out of the terminal or looking for jobs associated with it. Next slide. I think this is the last slide where we have our contact information in here. This is our team. Patrick, do you want to close us out here and just explain if people have interest in Avangrid or what we're doing, that who these folks are? Oh, you're muted again.
Thank you.
All right, well, maybe I'll just do it. Sorry. So Pat Johnson, obviously, is our community engagement specialist here. His email is there. Nikki Collard-Andrade is also our workforce development and supply chain director. We'd like to, and we have a fisheries liaison who I'm sure will be important to a lot of you folks on the North Shore that are involved in the fishing industry, Kayla Howard. That's her email there. And then of course, my contact information is in here as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Sorry, I forgot. I should have muted myself, but I think you covered it there, Jay. And just want to let folks know that you go to commonwealthwind.com if you'd like more information. And Jay and I will put Jay and my contact information in the chat as well. So thank you so much for the time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay and Pat, for that wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. Just a reminder for folks who are asking questions, you can put those into the chat and I will facilitate the questions during the Q&A session that will happen later on at the end of the program. Right now, we're going to hear from Larry Chretien. He's the Executive Director of the Green Energy Alliance of New England. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Hope you can see that now. That was a great presentation. Yeah, well, actually, Cindy's as well. I learned a lot. I'm going to talk about the connection that we're hoping to create between these wonderful offshore wind projects and what our organization calls green municipal aggregation. We're a nonprofit organization, and we operate in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We have an office in Boston and an office in Providence. We have a mission to harness the power of consumers to speed the transition to clean energy. And that's my contact information, which I'll also put into the chat. Our website is greenenergyconsumers.org. Many communities are in Massachusetts have moved to what's called municipal aggregation. They've adopted at the local level an option made available since 1997. Massachusetts enabled this to happen. What municipal aggregation is, if you're not familiar, it allows the city or town to go through their local decision-making process and to choose their electricity supplier. They have to get approval at the local level, then they have to get approval from the State Department of Public Utilities, which takes far too long, but that's a different story. And then they can hire a consultant. Usually, the Cape Light Compact hasn't hired a consultant. They do it all in-house with municipal employees. But the other communities in Massachusetts that do this hire a consultant who then manages a procurement process where they choose an electricity supplier. And so for many years, the Cape Light Compact was almost by itself. They serve all the towns on Cape Cod plus Martha's Vineyard. They've done a great job. Then a lot of communities got involved to try to use municipal aggregation to save some money. They thought that the procurement process through aggregation could save money compared to what you would normally pay National Grid or Eversource. But back in 2015 or so, we were contacted by a consultant, Good Energy, and we were asked, could we help an aggregation go greener than required by law? So we started that with the city of Melrose and the town of Dedham. And so on January 1st of 2016, they were the pioneers in what we call green municipal aggregation, which is we're able to procure the electricity supply, and then we're able to add to it more renewable energy content than required by law. We now serve our organization is directly involved in about 20 communities in Massachusetts doing green municipal aggregation. There are others that are doing aggregation by adding renewables. Here's a map. We're trying to track all this. If you see brown, it's the communities aggregating, but they're not adding new renewable energy. If they're dark green, they're adding quite a bit. And then there are shades in between. So what we're hoping over time is that the browns will turn to some shade of green, and that everybody will try to go to a more dark green color. There's quite a few that are still in process. And as you can see, the percent of the population in Massachusetts that's covered by aggregation has boomed in recent years. And there's still, to this day, there's still a bunch waiting for the Department of Public Utilities approval. So I'll go to the next slide, though, and tell you what the results have been. From an environmental perspective, just remember that Massachusetts law has a thing called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. That's really the main driver that makes a lot of the offshore wind projects supported. But current law says in this year, 2022, every supplier has to have 22% of what we call Class 1 RECs. That's basically wind and solar. But a lot of communities are adding 5, 10 or more percent to that. And it may not sound like a lot, but if you add 10% to 22%, that's a 45% increase in the amount of wind and solar. So if you were to go out onto the streets of Salem or Gloucester, you would ask someone, what do they think of renewable energy? They would think of wind and solar. And so with the aggregation, that's what we're able to provide more of that. Now, we extrapolated, what if every customer of Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, which are all the investor-owned utilities in Massachusetts, they're all subject to the Renewable Portfolio Standard, but what if every residential customer was involved in green municipal aggregation? The result would be 1,600 gigawatt hours of clean energy. Our friends at Avangrid could tell us how many wind turbines that would take. But that is, another way to put it is it's 16 million megawatt hours. It's quite a bit. So that's the environmental impact, which is enormous. And that comes without public subsidy. The state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is not supporting this. They're holding it back, actually, as I will complain time and again at the Department of Public Utilities. But this is essentially using the purchasing power of a community to get the renewable energy onto the grid. Now we shift to what does it cost? Well, we've tracked the communities that are somewhere between 5 and 11% more Class 1 renewable energy than required by law. And what we found is that they have saved 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour over the life of their aggregation. Now, that may not sound like a lot. You probably don't think about cents per kilowatt hour, but the average home uses about 6,000 a year. That's a savings of $78 per year for having power that is substantially cleaner than required by state law. I think it's the biggest win in Massachusetts clean energy progress in the last few years. Where essentially this is having your cake and eating it too. And it's essentially just a smarter alternative than basic service, and it's available to us. So we extrapolated, what if every residential consumer in the Commonwealth was engaged in an aggregation like these communities that have 5 to 11% more Class 1 RECs than required by state law? They would be paying $208 million per year less than if they were with getting their supply from National Grid or Eversource or Unitil. So we just think this is a story we're trying to get out there. We're going to be publishing our 3rd edition of a report on the status of aggregation in Massachusetts, and we'll be getting this word out, but you're hearing it for some of the first people to get these statistics. So what does this have to do with offshore wind? First of all, I think most of you are aware that the House passed a bill, Massachusetts House of Representatives passed House Bill 4515 that was mostly about offshore wind, which is wonderful. They did a very good job on that. But we snuck in a couple of amendments. And what the amendments that we liked was one that said that on the list of things that would give a future offshore wind developer some brownie points or greenie points, they would get some points for involving a municipal aggregator in their project. So we're looking forward to that. Then we had a provision that authorizes the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to try to find a way to provide some financial support to aggregators who are purchasing offshore wind. The offshore wind developers like Avangrid need a long-term contract to make their project financeable. The aggregations that have been occurring in Massachusetts tend to work on 3-year cycles, 3-year contracts with suppliers. So we want to figure out a way of bridging that time gap. So there's one way that we think is very viable. Very soon, because of all the solar we have in Massachusetts, but then when we get all this wonderful offshore wind power coming into Massachusetts through these contracts. So Avangrid would be having contracts with the state utilities, National Grid, Eversource, and Unitil. They're going to have far more renewable energy certificates, is the term, than they are required to have to meet the Massachusetts Renewable Portfolio Standard. And that's because everyone's aggregating and people are leaving National Grid and Eversource. So what are they going to do with all this offshore wind that they have? They're going to have to sell it back into the market. Okay, they've already supported Avangrid's projects and the other developers, but those renewable energy certificates will be out on the market. And what we want to do, those of us who are involved in municipal aggregation, is we want to grab those offshore wind recs and pull them into the content that's in the municipal aggregations that we're working with. Because here's the key. We're all part of a six-state New England power grid. And I think Patrick mentioned that. But, and so technically the utilities can comply with the Renewable Portfolio Standard by buying from a project in Maine or New Hampshire or any other state, even Canada or New York, if the power gets imported into the region. But we're all parochial, aren't we? We would rather buy get our renewable energy from these new projects, offshore wind projects. Again, I think once people are aware that the offshore wind projects are being built and they're coming, and then you ask them, where do you want your power to come from? They're going to say, I want my power to come from those great new projects. And so my mission and the organization's mission, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, is to try to keep working with the developers, working with the Clean Energy Center, and to essentially be a source of demand for the offshore wind projects. So, and what we want, quite frankly, is not just to support the projects that are contracted, like the list that Avangrid just gave us. We're asking to say, next developer, put on a few more extra turbines because we've got this great demand for municipal aggregation. And so that's what we're trying to do, is trying to drive the market, drive demand, because, you know, quite frankly, we cannot get this renewable energy content into our system fast enough. We have to start treating the climate crisis like what it is. It's a crisis, and we certainly don't want to be beholden any longer to the kinds of price spikes that we're seeing in fossil fuels because of Vladimir Putin and all that. So there's a better way here, and we can all have it. And that's my story.
Thank you, Larry. We really appreciate that. And again, if you have any questions for Larry, please put them into the chat. We will get them during the Q&A session. Now I'd like for Bob Blair to join us. He is going to talk about being a ship's pilot and some other things that he's working on. Thanks, Bob.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for including me in this delightful session. I'm very happy to talk about it. I've been deeply involved in the Port of Salem and helping to get the project established and moving, and it's a remarkable thing to watch. And it's taking a lot of people to get involved and help steer the course the way that we now see it happening. It's really awesome. I mean, I think Cindy mentioned, it was just a year ago in March of 21 when the owners of the footprint property were literally walking around town doing dog and pony shows with developers and designers and slide decks and everything about a wonderful 800-unit condominium development in the Port of Salem. And we were able to stop that and force them to put the property out to offshore wind. And here we are a year later talking about, $180 million port improvement project that Jay mentioned, and with projects waiting in the wings to be built. I mean, 2 gigawatts of electric power. Jay would correct me, but my math says that's $4 to $5 billion worth of investment in offshore. And the jobs that come out of that I have been listed. I mean, there's a lot of jobs to be had. But I think what I want to do is get to what does this really mean for Cape Ann? This is the topic of our session tonight. I mean, Cape Ann really means the Port of Gloucester, Massachusetts. And I've been, my father started Eastern Point Pilots in 1961. It was a ship pilot, and I became a ship pilot in 1983. That's almost 40 years ago. And so I've seen the Port of Gloucester at its heyday when there were 150 to 200 ships a year coming in and out of the port, and there were hundreds of people engaged and working on the docks and handling the cargo and vessels and selling fuel and food and supplies and crews coming ashore and all of the business that created downtown. That day is long gone, and it's not coming back. And I think when you look at the current state of Massachusetts seaports, there's only one seaport right now that is not seeing any benefit from this approaching boom in offshore wind job opportunities and port infrastructure investment, and that's the Port of Gloucester, Massachusetts. So it's for us in Gloucester, we're really talking about the projects most likely that are coming in to the Gulf of Maine, and that process is just getting underway. There will be projects. The timeline is probably 5 to 10 years away before those sites are laid out and companies have secured, like the Park Wind site and the Commonwealth Wind site and the Vineyard Wind site and so forth. That's going to happen in the Gulf of Maine. And when it does happen in the Gulf of Maine, guess what? The Port of Gloucester, Massachusetts is smack center in a convenient location to provide a lot of service opportunity for vessels that are going to be critically important, whether it's engineering vessels leading up to surveying all these sites and construction support vessels. What's happening in Salem and all these giant objects that are going to be landed there, that's not happening in Gloucester. It's not going to happen in Gloucester, and no one is proposing that it should happen or could happen in Gloucester because it cannot. The Port of Gloucester is not deep enough to handle those kinds of vessels, but the support vessels and all the jobs, because proximity is going to be key, Gloucester has proximity. And the other thing, and I think what's really important, is it's not just government money that's coming in to change ports. This is private businesses are coming into town and changing ports, making investments. And so what Gloucester needs to do is start meeting some of these industry players and talking about, well, what might the future be 5 years from now that the Port of Gloucester could be in a key location to take advantage of, and what sorts of planning or what sorts of partnering should we be looking to do? And now is the time for that to happen. The fact that Salem is happening further drives home the immediacy of the opportunity. I mean, otherwise, we can stick our heads in the sand and say, go away, but we already see that problem in the port. We already have a seaport that has not had any investment in infrastructure. We have hundreds of feet of ship docks where you cannot put a vessel alongside. Those companies that maintain those facilities or do not maintain those facilities are not in the business. They're in the business of occupying Gloucester Harbor, but not using Gloucester Harbor. And that honestly needs to change. But again, how is it going to change? It's going to change when a new industry emerges with the money and the financial horsepower to change it. And that's what's coming. And that's the opportunity. And I think it goes further. And I know from the standpoint of the fishing industry that concerns about whether or not offshore wind development will have impact and so forth, I would say the following. It's time to partner with the offshore wind industry and support the inevitability of what's coming, but also to take advantage and see how best to work with and around this ongoing and upcoming major transition and investments that are going to be taking place. It's a unique opportunity that we're on right now. We're really on the doorstep of almost an industrial revolution sort of experience when it comes to seaports on the East Coast. And this is not just happening in Massachusetts. This is happening in New York and Connecticut and Long Island and Virginia and all the way down the coast. Ports are getting investments. Ports are creating vibrancy where there was none. And so this is really the opportunity that I would tell everybody who's in attendance. Obviously, you care about the Port of Gloucester and Cape Ann, and that's why you're here. And as do I. I've earned my living in the port. There aren't very many ships right now, so I have to do other things. But I can see the day coming when these large vessels in Salem are going to be wonderful, and I'm very excited. But I would also tell you that if you care about the Gloucester Marine Railways and you want to see them survive, they need marine businesses coming to them asking to repair vessels and maybe upgrading and improving their facilities. Rose's Marine is the same way. If we don't want to have this giant concrete block in the middle of the waterfront called Americold Cold Storage with trucks and truck traffic clogging up the main street, then maybe it's time for an offshore wind player or support company to come in there and transition it and create office spaces and all the other places for engineering and kinds of things that need to happen with offshore wind development, and have the benefit of a dock right there in Gloucester Harbor where a vessel could come and go and be supportive of those activities. As being the last participant, I get to watch the clock a little bit. So I'm going to stop talking, but I will encourage everyone to stay involved and be involved, because in fact, what happened in Salem happened because we got involved and we said, this is not going to happen. We're not going to build condos in our harbor. We're going to save the working waterfront. We're going to save the Port of Salem, and we're going to continue to see the Port of Salem as a seaport for the next century as a result. And I think that in Gloucester, it's sort of the same story. If you want to see Gloucester as a commercial waterfront, offshore wind is the impetus. It's the people with the money who can come in and make a difference and work with the community and help protect and preserve the wonderfulness of the Cape Ann community that we love. So I'm going to turn it back to our wonderful host, and thank you for letting me have my 2 words.
Thank you, Bob. If you have any questions for Bob, please put them in the chat. I'm just going to kick off the Q&A session right now with a question from Ed Hand, kind of moving backward through some of the questions that have come in through the chat. Ed says, there will be a big demand for workers for some X number of years, but after initial construction, what does that future look like? Bob, you did outline some opportunities, ongoing opportunities.
I'll take a quick crack at that. And I meant to mention this, and I would say, tell your children to go to a maritime school. Tell your children to go to engineering schools. Tell your children to get skills in welding and fabrication and other kinds of things that, these jobs are coming. And these jobs, the maintenance and operation is going to be ongoing for the next 50 years at least. So these are industries that are coming, players that are coming to stay and to be part of the fabric of our communities, but they need skilled workers. And that's technical training, and that's maritime training or other technical training that are going to be the primary jobs.
Thank you, Bob, advocating for the trades here. And also, Gloucester High School has a trades program, and also Essex Tech. And I noticed that in one of the slides from one of our speakers. Thanks for that answer. And I'm going to take another question from before, and this is for Jay and Pat. Beyond marshaling, receiving and shipping, how much value-added assembly work will be done in Salem? And I think you touched on that a little bit, but could you just remind us?
Yeah, let me start, and then Pat, you can fill in where any blanks that I leave. First of all, what I think there has been kind of a misconception that's out there in the offshore wind ports that they're a flash in the pan, that they'll be utilized for the construction of one or two projects, and then they'll be put out to pasture. The fact of the matter is there's a pipeline of projects that are coming, and there is a morphing of the industry into other sort of new portions of energy production. So we'll start with putting in, the Park City Wind and Commonwealth Wind projects out of Salem, and using the resources of the North Shore. And then we'll be followed up by Copenhagen infrastructure partners who will fill their wind energy area with turbines as well, marshaled out of Salem. And then, and all of those turbines are by rule set to last about 25 years. There's about 15 to maybe 20 years of installation to go on here. And by that time, floating offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine will be coming along. And that'll be a good opportunity for Salem to roll right into the next 5 to 10 years of that kind of activity. And right about the time that floating is at least partially installed in the Gulf of Maine, the turbines that are off the south coast of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket will reaching the end of their life, and then they'll need to be what we call repowered. So new turbines, blades, and towers will go on top of the foundations that are there for the next 20 years, and it's just a cycle that will continue. So these the ports are going to be important for the foreseeable future for the offshore wind industry, as long as it remains an industry. And until the time that we can, invent a power that doesn't require any movement of anything or any burning of anything, then we are going to be having use for the vessels and the people and all of the operations that go with the offshore wind farms. Pat, if you want to add to that.
I think you covered it, Jay. I think it just obviously comment on the obvious that what a wise investment by the city of Salem in this opportunity, given that it's going to start with 2 signed contracts, MOUs of absolute tenants for nearly a decade, and then, as Jay laid out, every reason to believe that the port will be reserved up to the minute for several decades and longer to come. So the only other thing is that some of the other ports that Jay mentioned in his presentation, that we have on Martha's Vineyard and New Bedford, others, we're also going to be continuing to use those ports on an ongoing basis, because we're going to be maintaining our turbines and visiting, sending crews out there every day over the span of decades that they'll be in operation. Our company is going to be routinely maintaining them and servicing them to the highest standards. cleared. So there's going to be ongoing activity for that, even once they're in operation at some of the smaller ports. We won't be doing that out of Salem because Salem is going to be in such hot demand because it can take the huge parts that those smaller ports maybe that we're doing operations and maintenance out of can't. So it's going to be an ongoing job creator, not only in Salem, but in the other ports that are being built.
And as Bob mentioned, a very nice presentation, by the way, Bob. There is, once the floating offshore wind capacity up in the Gulf of Maine begins and offshore wind farms begin to get installed, Gloucester would be a really good place for an O&M base, either for if we are lucky enough to acquire one of the leases in the Gulf of Maine and be able to build a floating offshore wind farm there, or another offshore wind developer. There are good assets within the Port of Gloucester, and the report that was written for Mass CEC indicates that Gloucester does have some assets that would be useful for the operation and maintenance long-term for turbines that are located just north of Gloucester up in the Gulf of Maine.
Thank you so much, Jay and Pat. Another question, I believe, for this is a question for Bob, actually. Bob, Linda Stout Saunders says, how should the existing maritime entities in Gloucester approach, organize to investigate the potential partnerships or projects that can be done here? And please, these questions are often open to all of our panelists, so jump in and feel free. But Bob,
Yeah,
this one's to you.
Okay, I'll take the question, but I've been in and around Gloucester a long time. So which exact companies are we talking about here? And I'll tell you my opinion is that what made Gloucester a very popular port in its heyday from a shipping standpoint was the total availability of cold storage warehouses at the seafront. And so Gloucester had a real boom of hundreds of vessels a year for decades, carrying frozen fish from all over the world and landing it in the port of Gloucester, Massachusetts. Those facilities still sit there and still occupy the port, but no longer serve a function of seaport business. Any trade they're doing on the waterfront is being serviced by tractor trailer truck, either container cargo that's coming cross country on train, or cargo that's not legally able to land in the United States is being landed in Canada and trucked down. We don't need these cold storage facilities in our downtown waterfront any longer. They'd be better off up on the highway, up inside the industrial parks. And now this would really open up the harbor dramatically in a way that we've not seen in our lifetime. It really, and change forever, at least for the next forever, what could the possibility be in the Port of Gloucester. But it's going to start with some collaboration, but that collaboration is going to be driven by economics. And that economic is going to be driven by offshore wind. And so to turn Gloucester back into a real commercial working harbor is going to take money, and not just state money, but it's going to take partners. It's going to take companies like Avangrid and others that are out there that would say, hey, we would really like to be here. Gloucester is such a cool place. What if we had our headquarters here? And what if we went out to dinner every night downtown? It'd be wonderful. And we'd bring our people in from all over the world, and they'd stay here in Gloucester, and we'd do all our things right out of Gloucester because it's so wonderful. But right now, what's not wonderful is the state of affairs with its waterfront. It's horrible, and that needs to get fixed. So how we get Americold and Gorton's and the other players on the waterfront to get together and start talking about what might be their future move to a highway location to reopen the port, it's going to take participation by another private party on the other side of the table who would say, we will write you the check and we will take these facilities. But the city has a role to play, and the people in the community have a vital role to play in what that dialogue looks like. And we have a national grid connection site as well right there in the middle of the harbor. It's not a giant facility, but it is a facility. And again, another way that brings offshore wind investment into the port.
Bob, thank you so much for that answer. I just want to recognize that it is 8:30, and because we started a little bit late, I'd like to extend the Q&A, if that's okay with our panelists.
Okay.
This is a question for Cindy, and I think also Larry. Cindy, you put in the chat that you're interested in a North Shore Regional Compact for municipal aggregation. So, I'm interested in that, and what you think about that. And Larry, also what you have to say about something like that. Or is it North Shore, across the North Shore region? Is it a Cape Ann regional municipal aggregation? So that's sort of the question, the topic, Cindy and Larry.
Well, so that has been a long dream of mine for quite a while. We were very fortunate in that Cape Ann Climate Coalition actually took it on as one of the first projects as part of one of the energy subgroups, and Larry's organization and NAPC also got involved and helped us out in looking at the possibilities and pulling a bunch of towns together. But I think what we discovered at the time was that there was a lot of communities that were still on the slow climb to getting to municipal aggregation. And so they wanted to really get that done first before they thought about then partnering with other communities. But I do think it's an opportunity. From my perspective, I always thought, now that kind of offshore wind is just, finally kind of taking off, maybe it's not so much a critical issue, but one of the things that I always thought made sense was that the more we could all be directly involved in getting the energy from the offshore wind, the more our region would support offshore wind, right? So if we were seeing both the energy as well as the jobs from it, hopefully that would, help lift everybody in the region to support it further. And so if we had a regional grouping, it seemed like a better way to do it than town by town. So that's what we were kind of looking at. And I'm going to continue to hope that that's something we move forward on in the future. Larry, you want to say anything more?
Sure. I think that there are some benefits to working together. There's the organizations can get on the same page and try to get the best deals possible. Except that's not necessary. I don't think it's necessary, quite frankly. I think what's excellent is when communities are around the table, even if they have separate contracts for supply, but they could all go in together and talk to offshore wind developers and talk to electricity suppliers and adopt best practices. But they might, at the end of the day, have contracts that are one community going alone and another community going alone. It's more the concept. I think what we want to make sure is that every community sees the benefits to aggregation and that sees how it can bring on renewable energy step by step, right? First you aggregate, you try to bring in more renewable energy, and as soon as the offshore wind is flowing, you try to grab onto that. And I think that's sort of the approach that we're taking.
Thank you, Cindy and Larry. This is a question to all the panelists, and something that I've been thinking about too. We're in Massachusetts, there are a lot of open jobs, and not necessarily folks who are trained to take on these jobs. And so I know that education is an important element, the training, and we were talking about the trades, Bob, but also partnering with local colleges. I know Salem State was mentioned, North Shore Community College, and Essex Tech, and some other educational groups. What kind of educational investment will be made by offshore wind companies up on the North Shore, Cape Ann, and what can we expect in future for training opportunities for folks who are interested in getting into this field?
If I could start, I think that Jay might have a lot more to say, but I would just say that the bill that passed the House Bill 4515, would make a very significant state investment in workforce development connected to offshore wind, in particular, clean energy in general. The House of Representatives understands that there's these jobs that need to be filled, that people need to be trained, they need to be connected. They do want an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're encouraging our senators, our state Senate, to support that part of the House Bill 4515. So I don't know if people are aware, but the Senate a couple of weeks ago passed their own climate bill. And over the next couple of months, the House and the Senate will be conferring with each other and hashing out a new climate bill. And so we're hoping that it'll be strong on offshore wind. We are also, like Cindy, our organization is part of the New England Offshore Wind Coalition.
This is Jay from Avangrid. I'd just like to add, Maureen, that there will be outreach, and there will be meet the buyer meetings. I want to recognize, now that I can see everybody on the screen here, I'm realizing and would like to recognize the great Senator Lovely from our represents our district wonderfully in the Senate, and is a huge supporter of all of the things that we're doing, and particularly in the workforce development area. So I think that there will be a real coalition that will develop, that will include many communities on the North Shore, and that will be able to have direct connections with both ourselves, Crowley, and other developers in offshore wind, as well as other renewable energy companies that are either directly or tangentially involved. And I think this is a great opportunity. It's a great moment in time. And I think that from an individual standpoint, for folks that live in the Cape Ann area, to keep their eyes and ears peeled for things like meetings, town hall meetings that many of the folks working in both offshore wind and other renewable energy industries will have, meet the buyer events, events at the local colleges and schools. There will be a lot of those things that will be coming up over the next couple of years.
Just to briefly add on to what Jay said, like Larry said, our company is very excited about a lot of what is proposed in House Bill 4515. Also equally as excited by some of the proposals in the Senate bill on electrification and a wide range of other efforts that they have focused on in their bill. So hopefully we can do all the above and get a continue moving forward on our climate roadmap. I do want to say as well that in our Commonwealth Wind bid, we do have quite a bit in terms of commitments to academic institutions and to other organizations and of all kinds in Massachusetts, a lot of which hasn't been announced yet. So we certainly have plans to make some substantial commitments in that area that'll be announced in the coming months. And just looking at the precedent of what Salem could join in terms of what some of the South Coast and Southeastern Mass state colleges and universities and community colleges have done through an initiative called Connect for Wind. They've all joined together. That's Mass Maritime, Cape Cod Community College, Bristol Community College, UMass Dartmouth, Bridgewater State University, Massasoit Community College, and others. And they're all working together on shared different institutions working on different specialties. So there's a lot there that also the academic institutions on the North Shore can collaborate with and join and learn from their partner institutions on the South Coast.
Thank you, Pat. That's really good to know about. Cindy, did you want to mention anything about education and partnership?
I would just say that we're kind of waiting to hear more about what's in that bid from Avangrid and what the opportunities might be. And S.A.F.E, certainly would like to be part of that in kind of pulling organizations together and moving that forward. So we're definitely kind of learning more and waiting to see how we can pull folks together. And actually Salem State, as one of their Earth Day events this year, had a little bit more talk about kind of what some of the career opportunities will be. And unfortunately, one of the primary speakers was going to be from Bridgewater State, and talk about what they've been doing down there. So things are starting to connect already, and we hope to see more of that.
I would also just add in a quick plug for the Salem Marine Society, which annually provides scholarship support to both Massachusetts Maritime Academy and Maine Maritime Academy students. And that need is large. And so, you know, growing the amount of support for those academic pursuits are important, because as Jay was talking about, these Jones Act compliant vessels, well, they're going to need U.S. mariners on them to run them. And those folks, men and women, are going to come out of the maritime academies.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you all to our panelists. We're at 8:40. And so I'm just going to close our Q&A session. I'm hoping that all of you can send your slide decks to Susan Hoag, who's the producer for this event, and we can see if we can get those up on the Cape Ann Climate Coalition's website. And for our audience, you can please check back at CapeAnnClimateCoalition.org. So that would be great if we can get that. Also, Larry, would you mind sending a link to that report that you mentioned? You can also send that to Susan, and hopefully we can get that up or share that information with our participants this evening. I want to thank our audience participants. We had a great turnout tonight for this wonderful program. We know that there's more to be looked at with offshore wind and the Cape Ann Climate Coalition, and other groups on Cape Ann will be interested in presenting future webinars that will look at different issues and concepts and so forth. I'd like to thank our panelists this evening, Cindy Keegan, Jay Borkland and Pat Johnson, Larry Chretien and Bob Blair. Thank you for sharing your incredible experience with us and your passion and also the things that you're working on. It was a wonderful evening of information. And you know, we're thinking about things differently tonight about offshore wind and also opportunities in the ports. I'd also like to thank Susan Hoag for putting together this fantastic program, Candace Wheeler for her participation, Tom Meekus for his technical expertise doing Zoom, and Lisa Smith for all of her helpful assistance this evening with the Cape Ann Climate Coalition. So thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at a future program. And again, thank you so much to all our panelists. We've really enjoyed your presentations, and we look forward to seeing you also as participants and also future panelists. So thank you so much for this evening, and have a lovely evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.